I said we may do 4 chapters today. Yeah. Well,
Well, you got to get Terry to be quiet
yeah.
first.
As I said last week, the book of Job is, especially beginning in chapter 3, what is written in a poetry form, and again, not rhyming the way we think of poetry, but just in the use of the language and the descriptive and the exaggerations that would come with creative writing. So a lot of, beginning in chapter 3 following, there's really not a lot of, I'll say, commentary that needs to be brought out. So a lot of it is just going to be reading through and hitting the topics more than just each verse. So I think once we get going, you'll see what I mean here. But chapter 2 is more dialogue. It's between God and Satan again. Remember last week, Satan came in front of God, and it was God's idea to afflict Job. It was not Satan's. And God allowed Satan various ways to afflict Job, and all this was to prove Job's faithfulness, to prove Job's faith in the Lord and the love for the Lord, regardless of his circumstances. We'll see that being played out as we go through the book, but we know that Job won the first battle, as we will see here in chapter 2, but God knows that Job will not curse him, and that Job will not leave him. And as I said last week as well, God knows Job's name. God knows that Job is faithful to him, and just like he knows Job's name and knows who belongs to him then, he knows who belongs to him now. And if you belong to God, he does know you by name, and he does know you to be faithful. So we can take courage in the example that Job is showing for us throughout this book, and also understand that God knows the outcome. Satan doesn't. And so, but Satan we'll see here, he wastes no time. Once God gives him permission to afflict Job, Satan wastes no time in afflicting Job. So last week we read about how he lost all of his farm and his children. All of his children are gone. And yet it says there in chapter 1, verse 22, in all this Job sinned not, nor God charged foolishly. So then we come to the scene in chapter 2. A period of time has passed, whether that's been the next day, whether it was a week later. We don't know the span of time between chapters 1 and chapter 2, but seeing how quickly Satan works in chapter 1, I'm going to venture a guess to say that there's not a whole lot of time between chapters 1 and 2, perhaps maybe only a few days. But again, that's just pulling a number out of the air because I honestly don't know. But we do understand that Satan works quickly once given permission to do it. And so I can't imagine there being much delay. But nevertheless, only the Lord knows how long it was. So anyway, so chapter 2 is this second attack upon Job. The first, God said that you couldn't touch Job, and so Satan took all that he had. And here now in chapter 2, we will see that God allows Satan to touch Job, although he can't kill him. And so we'll see that played out here. Understand when we get to verse 3, Job has won the first round of this battle that's taking place between, or I can't say a battle, this game, supposedly, that we can say between God and Satan. And again, this is all for the benefit of Job. We may not understand that, but it's also for a benefit for us to understand that we can remain faithful to God regardless of the circumstance, and Job can be our example. So this is why it was written, for us to understand that at the end, we're still belonging to the Lord. So anyway, all that being said, I'll have more comment when we get to or chapter 3, and there might be some along the way here. But anyway, chapter 2 opens now with God and Satan speaking like they did in chapter 1. I think I'm ready.
Job 2.
Yeah, there we go.
Again there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord. And Satan came also among them to present himself before the Lord. And the Lord said unto Satan, From whence comest thou? And Satan answered the Lord, and said, From going to and fro in the earth, and from walking up and down in it. And the Lord said unto Satan, Hast thou considered my servant Job, that there is none like him in the earth, a perfect and an upright man, one that feareth God and escheweth evil? And still he holdeth fast his integrity, although thou movest me against him to destroy him without cause. And Satan answered the Lord and said, Skin for skin, yea, all that a man hath will he give for his life. But put forth thy hand now, and touch his bone and his flesh, and he will curse thee to thy face. And the Lord said unto Satan, Behold, he is in thine hand, but save his life.
There you go. So it's the same scene that we have in chapter 1, 7, and 8. The Lord speaking to Satan, and the Lord asks him, what are you doing? And Satan's basically what we would say today is hanging around. But notice what verse 3 says about Job. God says to Satan, have you considered my servant Job? Just like he did in chapter 1, verse 8. Hey, you know this guy down here? He loves me. He serves me. Now, as Satan said in chapter 1, well, yeah, but does he serve you for nothing? Look at all the blessings that you've given him. So, in Satan's point of view, the only reason that Job serves God is because of all the blessings that God has allowed Job to have. Of course, then we see it unfold in chapter 1 where all that was taken away. But then we see here in chapter 1 again, verse 22, in all this Job sinned not. So now the scene is going to turn, and as Satan says there, yeah, skin for skin. I mean, everybody will give up everything to save their life. And so God grants Satan the power to afflict Job personally in his flesh, but he can't kill him. Now we know that Satan, if had the opportunity, would just take him. But then obviously we would understand that Job would be out of this circumstance that he's going to find himself in here. But the fact of the matter is, God is allowing Job, or allowing Satan to persecute Job to prove Job's faithfulness to Job himself, and also to prove it to Satan. But Satan does not ever give up. Because notice, Job 1, round 1, he never cursed God. But then he says here in verse 5 of chapter 2, yeah, he'll curse you to your face if you touch his bone and his flesh. And as we're going to see through the rest of the book, Job never does that. And at the end of the book, Job is blessed twice as much as he was in chapter 1. What's that? Yeah, spoiler alert, yeah. I will say, I tried to look, and I kind of searched to see if anybody knew how long this persecution of Job was, and the scripture doesn't say whether it went on for a year or whether it went on for a matter of a short, maybe a month or even a week. We don't really know how long this all took, but nevertheless, we see here now. This is round 2. Job won at round 1, and now we're going to see here round 2 with Satan persecuting Job, beginning in chapter 2 now, verse 7.
So went Satan forth from the presence of the Lord, and smote Job with sore boils, from the sole of his foot unto his crown. And he took him a potsherd to scrape himself withal, and he sat down among the ashes. Then said his wife unto him, Dost thou still retain thine integrity? Curse God and die. But he said unto her, Thou speakest as one of the foolish women speaketh. What? Shall we receive good at the hand of God? And shall we not receive evil? In all this did not Job sin with his lips.
So, apparently, immediately, Satan leaves the presence of God and goes and afflicts Job with sore boils from the top of his head to the bottom of his feet. Now, I've got a list here. I didn't pass it out yet. I don't know why I didn't do it earlier, but I'll pass it out here just a little bit of the different types of afflictions that Job had. But apparently, at some point in this, he was covered head to toe with these boils that were sore, they were itchy, they oozed pus, you name it. He had it, and just awful. And apparently, it all came all at once. It wasn't like one thing just showed up, and then another. This was all at once, from the top of his head to the sole of his feet. I remember I had chicken pox, and I had chicken pox in the bottom of my feet, and I don't think I could walk because it hurt so bad. I don't remember. I remember having to crawl, but anyway, yeah, having that on the bottom of your, and you have an itchy foot, you just can't get rid of it. Well, no, I didn't do that, but yeah. But he goes out among the ashes, maybe at the burn pile of the city. I really don't know why he went there. None of the commentators really mentioned why he would have went out there, other than to perhaps get away from his wife, which she's a peach. Living with somebody like that, no wonder he went to the dump, I guess. But perhaps in some ways he went to the dump to get away from the public or from anybody that he may come in contact with, because perhaps he's thinking that he will afflict others. But notice there, he took a potsherd or a piece of pottery and was scraping his skin, trying to itch himself. Everybody got a back scratcher at home, and perhaps maybe he's trying to break open these boils to relieve the pressure that they might be holding as well. So it's not a pretty scene. But now here comes his wife. Now I will say, after verses 9 and 10, his wife is not mentioned again in Scripture, other than he has children at the end of the book. But and we assume that it's with his wife here, because it doesn't say that he ever lost his wife or got remarried or anything like that. But and we don't know her status with the Lord. Was was Job a God-fearing man and his wife wasn't? Maybe her faith wasn't as strong as Job's. I don't know. But she goes and says, "Why don't you just die? You'd be out of this misery." I guess there comes a point in time when you realize you're not going to get any better, so you just pray that God would just take you. But this is perhaps day one. Well, yeah, Satan could have used her. We don't know. But she doesn't necessarily have anything good to say about him. Why don't you just, you retain your integrity? You're not even going to, because in her mind, apparently, she's thinking if he curses God, then God will kill him for blasphemy. Which, and he says there in verse 10, should we receive good at the hand of God and not receive evil? We're just people. We're just clay. We're clay in the potter's hands, is what we've been told. And so, in Job's opinion here, at least, he's under the impression that all of this is for God's glory. Now, we will see here in chapter 3, Job has a different attitude, but we won't jump that far ahead. But understand, Job is in misery. Perhaps this is just day one, and his wife has already turned on him. Verse 11.
Now when Job's 3 friends heard of all this evil that was come upon him, they came every one from his own place, Eliphaz the Temanite, and Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naamathite, that they had made an appointment together to come to mourn with him, and to comfort him. And when they lifted up their eyes afar off, and knew him not, they lifted up their voice and wept. And they rent every one his mantle, and sprinkled dust upon their heads toward heaven. So they sat down with him upon the ground 7 days and 7 nights, and none spake a word unto him, for they saw that his grief was very great.
Job's 3 friends, Bildad, Eliphaz, and Zophar. They make an appointment. They come together. They don't come individually. They all 3 come together to see Job. And they can tell from afar off that Job is not the same Job that he was yesterday or last week. He is greatly afflicted. And it says there that they lifted up their voice and they wept, they rent their garments, and they sprinkled dust on their heads. That was a common, ancient form of sorrow and mourning. So they are feeling emotionally Job's afflictions. And it says there, they sat down with him 7 days, 7 nights, and none said a word. Now, that might be hard for us to believe, a whole week? But that's what Scripture tells us. Now, have you ever went to visit someone, and when you see them, you don't know what to say, and you just don't say anything? I remember when Nina Watts, she was walking the dog, and the dog took off running and dragged her for several feet, and she ran headlong into the tree and broke her. I remember when we went to see her, you couldn't say anything because I just wasn't expecting her to be. Now she come out of that all right. But when I first went to see her, I didn't know what to say because I just wasn't expecting her to look, as rough as she was. So, but I can't imagine sitting in her room for 7 days and not saying anything. So this must really have been an effect on Job's friends here for them to spend. But they were faithful. They stayed all week with him. It would be nice to have 3 good friends like Job. Now we're going to find out, especially in chapter 4 and 5, that Job had good friends, but they didn't have very good theology. And we'll talk about that when we get to chapter 4 and 5 here. But they were good, faithful friends. They stayed with Job, and they tried to comfort him. And again, as we will see, I'm jumping ahead now, but when we see Eliphaz speak in chapter 4 and 5, we understand that he means well, but it's nice to have good friends, and it's really nice to have good friends that have good theology. I'll put it that way. We'll see that later. Any comments on chapter 2?
It never says that Job never said anything, just the 3 friends never said anything.
Right. Well, we're going to see here in chapter 3 here that Job speaks. So perhaps, it says there in verse 1, after this,
Yeah.
so we assume that's after the 7 days. We don't know. So, all right. So we have this picture of Job out at the burn pile of the city. Yeah, Lee can pass these. I pass these out. These are the afflictions that Job had. His friends have been there, and now, after they've came, Job begins to speak. Now, essentially, chapter 3 is Job lamenting his birth and how he wished he would have never been born. Because if he had never been born, he would not have had this affliction. Now, afflictions can cause us to say and do things that we typically wouldn't do. Job would not have felt this way if none of this would have happened. So understand that our circumstances perhaps dictate, more than they should, our feelings. Our circumstances dictate how we act during the day. You're having a bad day, everything you do goes wrong. I read something this week. Why is it that my shirt or my belt loop only catches on the door handle when I'm in a bad mood? Just that kind of stuff just gets stirred up. So understand here in chapter 3, Job is lamenting his birth and wished he would die, or that he would have never been born, so that he would have never had this affliction to come upon him. But Job never had this attitude prior to this. So we understand his feelings are dictating his attitude. Now again, we are human, and that's going to happen. But understand, through all of this, though, Job keeps his integrity and never curses God, never blames God through it all. All right? So, that being said, a lot of this is just reading. Again, a lot of it is descriptive language or exaggerations in some way. So I'm not really going to stop and talk a whole lot as we go through chapter 3 here. But understand that Job is lamenting and wished he'd have never been born, or that he would have just, he would have never been conceived, whatever you want to say here, because then he wouldn't have been in this spot that he's in today. But understand, had Job never been born, he would have never felt the love of God prior to this. He would have never known the blessings that come with having 10 children and the blessings that God provided for him prior to chapter 1. And again, we can all feel sorry for ourselves today and completely forget what God's done for us in the days past. So again, living for Christ is day to day. And you have good days, you're going to have bad days, but we should never wish that we would have never been born, because the Lord's been good to us. Anyway, chapter 3, verse 1. Whoop. There we go.
Job 3. After this, opened Job his mouth, and cursed his day. And Job spake and said, Let the day perish wherein I was born, and the night in which it was said, There is a man-child conceived. Let that day be darkness, let not God regard it from above, neither let the light shine upon it. Let darkness and the shadow of death stain it. Let a cloud dwell upon it, let the blackness of the day terrify it. As for that night, let darkness seize upon it. Let it not be joined unto the days of the year, let it not come into the number of the months. Lo, let that night be solitary, let no joyful voice come therein. Let them curse it that curse the day, who are ready to raise up their mourning. Let the stars of the twilight thereof be dark. Let it look for light, but have none, neither let it see the dawning of the day, because it shut not up the doors of my mother's womb, nor hid sorrow from mine eyes. Why died I not from the womb? Why did I not give up the ghost when I came out of the belly? Why did the knees prevent me? Or why the breast that I should suck? For now should I have lain still and been quiet, I should have slept, then had I been at rest. With kings and counsellors of the earth, which built desolate places for themselves, or with princes that had gold, who filled their houses with silver, or as an hidden untimely birth I had not been, as infants which never saw light. There the wicked cease from troubling, and there the weary be at rest. There the prisoners rest together, they hear not the voice of the oppressor. The small and great are there, and the servant is free from his master. Wherefore is light given to him that is in misery, and life unto the bitter in soul, which long for death, but it cometh not, and dig for it more than for hid treasures, which rejoice exceedingly, and are glad when they can find the grave. Why is light given to a man whose way is hid, and whom God hath hedged in? For my sighing cometh before I eat, and my roarings are poured out like the waters. For the thing which I greatly feared is come upon me, and that which I was afraid of is come unto me. I was not in safety, neither had I rest, neither was I quiet, yet trouble came.
This is a guy that's pretty low down. Wish he had never been born. If I would just die, I would be with the kings and the counselors and these people that are rich. They're just out in the grave. There's no suffering. Now, I would say at this point, Job and his ilk in this time period perhaps don't necessarily understand heaven and hell and the judgment and all that. I'm not going to get into all that, but understand that in Job's reasoning here, if I was dead, I would be freed from this affliction. Or if I would have never been born, I'd be freed from this affliction. And again, going back there to verse 14 or 13 and 14, I should have been. For now, should I have lain still and been quiet, I should have slept. Then had I been at rest with kings and counselors of the earth, which built desolate places for themselves, or with princes that had gold who filled their houses. Goes on to say there that prisoners rest together. There's no fear of the oppressor. If I would just die, if I would have never been born, or if I would just die, I would be free from this. Now, Job perhaps had it in himself to kill himself, but he didn't, because even in his low point here, he knows that he belongs to God, and it's up to God to afflict him and to take him if that's what he wants. Now, perhaps he doesn't necessarily say that here, but there's got to be something inside of him that keeps him from just killing himself. And it seems to me like at this frail state, perhaps he would just have the strength to do it. And that would be all. But he understands that the Lord has something for him, or he would just go ahead and do it. Yeah. Yeah. What? Yeah. Yeah. Why has God given me the blessings to now just do this? I'm hedged in. Now I can't even escape, because in Job's point here, there's nothing he can do to relieve himself. He's scraping his skin with this piece of broken pottery, and God has got him closed in. Whereas before in chapter 1, we're reading about a hedge of protection. That's in chapter 1, verse 5, I think. No, verse 10. But now I believe what he's saying here in verse 23 is God has hedged me, and I can't even escape this plight that I'm in. So in some ways, Job's feelings are allowing him to affect his attitude, but don't misunderstand. I'm perhaps the worst when it comes to that. But we also need to understand that God is faithful regardless of the circumstances that we're in. And we all get bad news. If you've lived your life and you've not ever been given bad news, well, you're going to have it very soon then, because we all get bad news that comes our way. But Job feeling pretty low about himself right now. Now, verse 4 or chapter 4, we have his buddy Eliphaz speak, Now, again, I want to point this out. Eliphaz and Zophar and Bildad are good friends to come and stay with Job, especially it seems like his wife has left him, or at least is not staying with him. But Eliphaz's theology is not correct, and we'll see that as we go through here. Eliphaz's attitude toward Job is that Job has some type of sin in his life that he has not confessed, and this is why his affliction has come upon him. Whereas we have read twice when God speaks about Job, there is nothing in Job that keeps him from being blessed. Job is an upright man. He's full of integrity. He hates evil. And so God has already spoken in chapter 1 and chapter 2 that Job does not have a hidden sin that would cause this affliction. But now Eliphaz doesn't know that. And so Eliphaz is going to use some bad theology here to make Job feel even worse, as we'll see here beginning in chapter 4. But understand, he means well. And I'm sure we can all probably think of somebody in our life that means well, but just kind of sometimes falls a little short of what we need. Anyway, so I don't want to run Eliphaz under the bus, but I also want us to understand that what he's going to say to Job is not actually accurate about what God thinks of Job. All right, we'll see that as we go through here. And I told you, once we start reading the chapter, I think it just goes through. But nevertheless, let's start chapter 4 here, and we'll see what Eliphaz says to Job.
Job 4. Then Eliphaz the Temanite answered and said, If we essay to commune with thee, wilt thou be grieved? But who can withhold himself from speaking?
First off, if we start talking to you, are you going to be grieved? Now, Eliphaz, again, he doesn't have much encouraging words for Job. But Eliphaz says, I can't not talk. So that's what he's saying there in verse 2. I'm going to say this. You may not like it. Poor guy. Verse 3.
Behold, thou hast instructed many, and thou hast strengthened the weak hands. Thy words have upholden him that was falling, and thou hast strengthened the feeble knees. But now it is come upon thee, and thou faintest. It toucheth thee, and thou art troubled. Is not this thy fear, thy confidence, thy hope, and the uprightness of thy ways?
So Eliphaz starts out right. He said, you've been the encourager. You've been the one to help people. You've been the one to give. You've counseled and strengthened people. Verse 5, but now it's come upon you, and you faint. Kind of like he's saying, suck it up, bucko. Think about all these people that you've helped through the years, and now all of a sudden you need help? Again, not really the best encouraging words to say, but nevertheless, it touches thee, and thou art troubled. You're bothered. The same afflictions perhaps that people have had, now you're bothered that you've got it. Well, yeah. I mean, I think about cancer. We've all probably have heard of people that have it, but then it's like, well, when it happens to us, it's a lot bigger deal. And so, and the thing, and Job, perhaps in that same way, the thing that I have helped others get through, now I have. Perhaps not the same exact affliction, but you understand, afflictions come in various stages. But Eliphaz here is pointing out, you've helped these others, now you've got what you've been helping other people with. And again, in Eliphaz, we'll see this played out in chapter 4. In Eliphaz's thinking, the reason this has happened to Job is because he has a secret sin that he's not confessed, and he's paying the price for it. But that's incorrect. But again, as we go through this, understand in the back what motivates Eliphaz to say what he says. And Eliphaz is speaking in chapter 4 and 5. That's all one long discourse here. Verse 6, I think.
Remember, I
7.
pray thee, whoever perished being innocent.
Yeah.
Or where were the righteous cut off?
Bad
Even
theology.
as I have seen, they that plow iniquity and sow wickedness reap the same. By the blast of God they perish, and by the breath of his nostrils are they consumed.
Now, I will say, too, about Eliphaz. In his way of thinking, perhaps what he is trying to bring out is, Job, if you have unconfessed sin that has caused this, just admit it. Just get it out, and then you'll be healed. That's Eliphaz's theology. And again, in some ways, people become afflicted by the sin in their lives, but Eliphaz is assuming 100% that the reason that Job is sick is because he has sin in his life that he's not confessed. And again, this is wrong because we know what God has said about Job in chapters 1 and 2. But he's saying there, whoever perished being innocent, everybody that's died has got some, everybody's got sin. Everybody that sows wickedness, they reap the same. And that's true in a way. But again, I want to remind everybody of what God said about Job, that he fears God and eschews evil, or avoids it. He runs from it. And so this is not the cause for Job's affliction. We know that. But Eliphaz doesn't know it. Verse 9 or 10, I can't remember now. 10.
The roaring of the lion, and the voice of the fierce lion, and the teeth of the young lions are broken. The old lion perisheth for lack of prey, and the stout lion's whelps are scattered abroad. Now a thing was secretly brought to me, and mine ear received a little thereof.
Now he's saying, now I had this dream about you, Job.
In thoughts from the visions of the night, when deep sleep falleth on men, fear came upon me, and trembling, which made all my bones to shake. Then a spirit passed before my face. The hair of my flesh stood up. It stood still, but I could not discern the form thereof. An image was before mine eyes. There was silence, and I heard a voice saying, Shall mortal man be more just than God? Shall a man be more pure than his Maker? Behold, he put no trust in his servants, and his angels he charged with folly. How much less in them that dwell in houses of clay, whose foundation is in the dust, which are crushed before the moth. They are destroyed from morning to evening. They perish forever, without any regarding it. Doth not their excellency which is in them go away? They die, even without wisdom.
So Eliphaz went to bed with a stomach ache, and he has this dream, he says, and he's thinking that this dream that he has is from God, which that's typically not the way God, he did speak in dreams to some in the Old Testament, don't misunderstand, but not in this case. Now, I've had, I can remember my dreams for the most. Anybody remember their dreams? Just me? Okay. I do too. Tammy if she ever dreams, she don't ever tell me. But some of my dreams, they're epic, I gotta tell. I worked with one guy, his dreams seemed like they went on for 10 or 12 hours. Well, yeah. But I never, and there's some dreams I've had that it's like, oh, wow. But I know they're just last night's pizza or the cold medicine working, like Daniel said. So I'm not going to take theology from my dreams. But here, Eliphaz, hey, I've had a dream. And this is what the dream said. Shall mortal man be more just than God? Well, and in fact, that's true. We're not more just than God. Shall a man be more pure than his maker? Well, that's true. We're not. So perhaps what Eliphaz is saying here is, you're just dust. You're just a mere man. Shouldn't you be afflicted because you have sin in your life? Again, I want us to refer back. I'm going to repeat this. Job did not have a secret sin that caused this affliction. We know that because of what God said in chapter 1 and chapter 2. All right? But I want us to remember that, because if we don't, perhaps we will begin to think that the reason why Alexis is afflicted is because she's got some kind of hidden sin that she doesn't want to admit. Yeah, what?
So is a secret sin just like something you're holding on to and not haven't came and confessed it to God yet?
Probably, yeah. But again, that's not in Job's case here. But Eliphaz doesn't know that. Chapter 5 continues the same diatribe against Job here, and this is still Eliphaz talking here in chapter
Job
5.
5. Call now if there be any that will answer thee, and to which of the saints wilt thou turn? For wrath killeth the foolish man, and envy slayeth the silly one. I have seen the foolish taking root, but suddenly I cursed his habitation. His children are far from safety, and they are crushed in the gate. Neither is there any to deliver them.
Now he's even referring to Job's kids. Well, the reason that they died was because they were far from you. You know, I mean, slap, slap here.
Whose harvest the hungry eateth up, and taketh it, even out of the thorns, and the robber swalloweth up their substance. Although affliction cometh not forth of the dust, neither doth trouble spring out of the ground. Yet man is born unto trouble, as the sparks fly upward.
That's true.
I would seek unto God, and unto God would I commit my cause.
I like what Eliphaz says here in verse 8. In a way, here's what I would do, Job, if this was me. Now, I'm sure we've all heard a time or two somebody say, well, if that happened to me, this is what I would do. Well, you don't really have any idea what you would do until it happens to you. But here's Eliphaz. Well, I know if I was in your spot, Job, here's what I would do. Again, perhaps not the best advice, but I want to say this too. I think Eliphaz means well, but he just, it's like he's throwing at a dartboard, and instead of hitting the bullseye, he's hitting right outside the score, I'm trying here, Job, but anyway, verse 7, this is what I would do. I would seek God, and I would commit to God. Well, again, as I've already said, Job has. Verse 9, continuing on here.
Which doeth great things, and unsearchable, marvelous things without number.
That's talking about God, that's
who
true.
giveth rain upon the earth, and sendeth waters upon the fields, who set upon high those that be low, that those which mourn may be exalted to safety. He disappointeth the devices of the crafty, so that their hands cannot perform their enterprise. He taketh the wise in their own craftiness, and the counsel of the froward is carried headlong. They meet with darkness in the daytime, and grope in the noondays in the night. But he saveth the poor from the sword, from their mouth, and from the hand of the mighty. So the poor hath hope, and iniquity stoppeth her mouth. Behold, happy is the man whom God correcteth. Therefore despise not thou the chastening of the Almighty.
Here verse 17, hey, be happy this happened to you, Job. God's correcting you. Hey, easy for you to say, Eliphaz. Ain't nothing wrong with you.
For he maketh sore, and bindeth up. He woundeth, and his hands make whole. He shall deliver thee in 6 troubles, yea, in 7 there shall no evil touch thee. In famine he shall redeem thee from death, and in war from the power of the sword. Thou shalt be hid from the scourge of the tongue, neither shalt thou be afraid of destruction when it cometh. At destruction and famine thou shalt laugh, neither shalt thou be afraid of the beast of the earth. For thou shalt be in league with the stones of the field, and the beast of the field shall be at peace with thee. And thou shalt know that thy tabernacle shall be in peace, and thou shalt visit thy habitation, and shalt not sin. Thou shalt know also that thy seed shall be great, and thine offspring as the grass of the earth. Thou shalt come to thy grave in a full age, like as a shock of corn cometh in his season. Lo, this, we have searched it, so it is, hear it, and know thou it for thy good.
So toward the end here, beginning perhaps in verse 17, Eliphaz is correct in the fact that God will protect those that belong to him. God will bless those that belong to him. So Eliphaz is correct here in all these blessings that God gives to people that are the Lord's. But again, Eliphaz's whole motivation is to get Job to confess to some unknown sin that he has, and then he would automatically be released from this affliction. And so, while again, Eliphaz means well, and I've said this, I just want to repeat it. Eliphaz means well, and he does have some theology correct in what God does for people. He's assuming that the only reason that Job has these boils and that he's lost all of his kids and all this other stuff is because Job has sinned and is holding on to that sin. He's not confessed it to God. And again, we know that's not to be the case. And again, we should not, assume that the reason someone is having a bad go at life, so to speak, is because they are in sin. Perhaps they are, but that is something that we cannot know and will not know in our lifetime. And perhaps God is putting somebody through a test for their own self or for their own faith, or perhaps to strengthen the faith of others. We don't know. And God can use your afflictions, like he did Job, to strengthen and encourage others. Now, it may bring us to the point that we say, why me? Or woe is me. But we all need to understand that we are in God's hands, that he will do with what he pleases. And we all have to admit that the Lord has been pretty good to us. And regardless of what we've all been through, the Lord's still faithful, and the Lord is still taking care of us. And yeah, we may have been down a time or two, but the Lord's always raised us back up. And that's what's going to happen to Job. We just got to get through 40 more chapters to see the end of it.